Judge Frank Caprio froze when he looked at the photograph in the case file. The bruises on 8-year-old Sofia's arms, the scratches on her face. This wasn't an ordinary child abduction case. This was the story of a father trying to save his child from hell. The judge had seen thousands of cases in his 40-year career. Domestic violence, custody battles, child neglect. He thought he had seen it all, but these photographs in his hands deeply shook him to his core. The fear in the little girl's eyes wasn't just fear of punishment or discipline. It was the terror of a child who had been systematically tortured. "Mr. Mendez," said Frank Caprio, looking at the 34-year-old man standing before him with trembling hands, "the charges against you are very serious. Child abduction across state lines carries a federal sentence of up to 20 years. However, before seeing these photographs, the situation appears far more complex than I understood." Carlos Mendez stood at the court podium, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. This man, who had immigrated from Mexico 12 years ago and worked construction jobs to survive, was living his greatest nightmare, potentially losing his daughter forever while being painted as the villain. According to the official charges filed by the district attorney's office, Carlos had taken his 8-year-old daughter Sofia from her mother's residence without legal consent on the morning of March 15. Security footage from Logan International Airport showed him attempting to board a flight to Mexico City with the child. He was arrested by TSA agents just minutes before takeoff, charged with interstate child abduction, custodial interference, and attempting to flee the jurisdiction. The prosecution's case seemed straightforward. A bitter ex-husband, angry about losing custody, decides to steal his child and disappear across international borders. It was a story prosecutors had seen dozens of times before, but this morning, documents delivered by Carlos's court-appointed attorney, Rachel Martinez, were about to shatter every assumption about this case. "Your Honor," said Attorney Martinez, a young public defender who had initially taken this case expecting a routine plea bargain, "my client's story may seem unbelievable at first, but the evidence we've uncovered shows how horrifically wrong our initial assessment was." She approached the bench carrying a manila folder thick with documents, photographs, and digital evidence that had taken weeks to compile. "These photographs you're examining were taken by Sofia's school nurse, Mrs. Patricia Coleman, over a period of 6 months. They document a pattern of systematic child abuse that multiple agencies failed to recognize or address." Frank Caprio examined Sofia's photographs again, this time more carefully. What he initially thought were isolated incidents now revealed themselves as part of a horrifying pattern. Cigarette burn marks on the child's left arm, not just one, but multiple burns in various stages of healing. Belt buckle marks across her back, photographed during a routine school health screening. Fingernail scratches on her face that the child had claimed came from playing with neighborhood cats. "When were these photographs officially documented?" asked the judge, his voice betraying the first hints of the anger that was building inside him. "The documentation spans from September of last year through February of this year, Your Honor. Mrs. Coleman followed proper protocol and reported each incident to Child Protective Services. Each report was filed, investigated, and ultimately dismissed." Carlos began to sob quietly. "Your Honor, when my daughter called me that day, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She was saying, 'Papá, por favor, ayúdame. Ella me va a matar. Dad, please help me. She's going to kill me.' The terror in her voice. No parent should ever have to hear their child sound like that. Frank Caprio turned his attention to the case file's background information on Amanda Williams, Sofia's mother. On paper, she appeared to be exactly the kind of parent-family courts typically favored in custody disputes. Amanda Williams, 29, was a licensed real estate agent with Hamilton and Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious firms. She lived in a 4-bedroom colonial house in Newton, one of the city's most desirable suburbs. Her credit score was excellent, her employment history stable, and her character references included a city councilman, 2 attorneys, and the pastor of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. When she and Carlos had divorced 18 months earlier, the family court judge had awarded her primary custody almost immediately. Carlos, with his limited English, inconsistent work history, and lack of legal immigration status, seemed like exactly the kind of unstable influence courts tried to minimize in children's lives. But these documents, said Attorney Martinez, spreading a new set of papers across the defense table, reveal Amanda Williams's carefully hidden true nature. The first document was a detailed report from Sofia's elementary school principal, Dr. Helen Morrison. In it, she documented a troubling pattern of behavior that had emerged over the past year. Sophia, once an outgoing and social child, had become withdrawn and fearful. She frequently fell asleep in class, arrived at school in dirty clothes, and had begun hoarding food food from the cafeteria in her backpack. The second document was even more damning. It was a detailed report from Sofia's pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been treating the child since birth. Dr. Chen's notes showed a dramatic increase in accident-related injuries over the past 8 months. September 12th, patient presence with bruised ribs, mother reports fall from bicycle, read one entry. October 3rd, second-degree burn on left palm, mother reports child touched hot stove. November 15th, concussion symptoms, mother reports child fell downstairs. December 8th, multiple contusions on back and legs, mother reports child fell from treehouse. Dr. Chen's medical opinion, included in the report's conclusion, was devastating. The pattern and severity of injuries are inconsistent with typical childhood accidents. The explanations provided by the guardian do not align with the physical evidence. The frequency of emergency room visits has increased by 400% over the past year. I have serious concerns about this child's safety. Why wasn't this evidence presented during the original custody hearing? Asked Frank Caprio, his voice rising with barely controlled anger. Attorney Martinez's expression darkened. Because, Your Honor, Amanda Williams had connections that Carlos Mendez could never hope to match. She placed another document on the judge's desk. This is the caseworker assignment record from the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families. Sofia's case was assigned to Linda Carter, a 15-year veteran social worker with an exemplary record. What the record doesn't show, Martinez continued, is that Linda Carter and Amanda Williams were sorority sisters at Boston University. They've maintained a close friendship for over a decade. Carter was even the maid of honor at Amanda's first wedding. Frank Caprio's eyes widened. In 4 decades on the bench, he had seen corruption, favoritism, and incompetence, but rarely had he encountered such a blatant conflict of interest. Furthermore, Martinez added, producing bank records, Amanda Williams has purchased 3 properties through Linda Carter's husband's construction company over the past 2 years. We're talking about a business relationship worth over $400,000. But that's not all, Your Honor. The investigating police officer, Detective Michael Bradley, is Amanda Williams's first cousin. The family court mediator, Sarah Williams Thompson, is Amanda's sister-in-law. And the court-appointed child advocate works for the same real estate firm where Amanda is employed. Frank Caprio sat back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't just a case of system failure. It was systematic corruption designed to protect Amanda Williams regardless of the evidence against her. Mr. Mendez, said Frank Caprio, turning his attention back to Carlos, I need you to tell me, in your own words, exactly what happened on March 15th. Carlos wiped his eyes and took a shaky breath. Despite having lived in the United States for over a decade, his English was still heavily accented and sometimes broken, a fact that had worked against him in every previous legal proceeding. Your Honor, that morning I was working construction job in Brookline, new office building. We were pouring foundation. My supervisor, you don't like when we get personal calls, but Sofia, she found way to call me from school bathroom. Carlos's voice cracked as he continued. She was crying so hard, Your Honor. She said, Papá, ayúdame. Mami me pegó muy fuerte anoche. Help me, Daddy. Mommy hit me very hard last night. She said Amanda had beaten her with electrical cord because she spilled juice on carpet. I left work immediately. I don't care about job. I don't care about money. My daughter was in danger. When I got to school, I found Sofia hiding in bathroom stall. She was so scared, Your Honor. She begged me not to take her back to Amanda's house. Frank Caprio leaned forward. Did you contact the authorities at that point? Carlos laughed bitterly. Your Honor, I had contacted authorities many times before. In past 6 months, I called police 4 times, Child Protective Services 6 times, even called school district twice. Every time they told me same thing. Mr. Mendez, you are angry ex-husband. These are serious accusations. Do you have proof? And did you have proof? Asked the judge. I had photographs Sofia took with my phone when she visited me on weekends. I had recordings of her crying, telling me what Amanda did to her. I had medical records from emergency room visits. But they said was not enough. They said Amanda was credible witness and I was disgruntled former spouse. Attorney Martinez then presented what would become the most powerful evidence in the case, Sofia's own voice recordings made by Carlos during their supervised visits. Your Honor, said Attorney Martinez, there's also Sofia's own testimony. Carlos made recordings during their visits, hoping someone would eventually listen to his daughter's voice. Frank Caprio put on the headphone. Little Sofia's voice, barely above a whisper, filled his ears. Papa, Mommy gets very angry with me when I make noise. She puts me in the closet for a long time when I'm bad. Sometimes I have accidents because I'm scared to ask for bathroom. She burns me with her cigarettes when I don't clean good enough. She says if I tell anyone, she will give me away to strangers and I'll never see you again. The innocence and terror in the child's voice affected affected everyone in the courtroom. Several spectators wiped their eyes, and even the stenographer paused in her work. The recording continued. She practices with me what to say if doctors ask questions. She says if I tell truth, police will arrest Papa and send him back to Mexico, and then Mommy will hurt me worse because it will be my fault. Frank Caprio removed the headphones, visibly shaken. When was this recording made? 2 weeks before Carlos took Sofia to the airport, Your Honor. It was during one of their court-supervised visits. Carlos continued his testimony, his voice growing stronger as he relived that terrible day. When I saw Sofia in that bathroom stall, Your Honor, she was not the same little girl I remember. She was thin, too thin. Her hair was dirty. Her clothes smelled bad. But worst of all, she was afraid of everything. She showed me new bruises on her legs, cigarette burns on her arms. She lifted up her shirt and showed me where Amanda had hit her with belt buckle. The marks were still fresh, Your Honor. Some were bleeding. Frank Caprio had to pause the proceedings for a moment. As a father himself, hearing these details was almost unbearable. That's when Sofia grabbed my arm and begged me, "Papa, please don't make me go back." She said next time she will kill me. Your Honor, my daughter was not being dramatic. She believed her mother was going to murder her. Carlos stood up straighter, his voice filled with conviction. In that moment, I made decision that I know was against law. But sometimes, Your Honor, law is not same as justice. Sometimes law fails children, and fathers must step in. I took Sofia to my apartment. I packed bag with her clothes, her favorite stuffed animal, some food. I bought 2 plane tickets to Mexico City, where my mother lives. I thought if I could get Sofia to safety, maybe then authorities would listen. But we never made it on plane. Airport security stopped us at gate. Sofia was crying, begging them not to separate us. She kept saying, "Please don't send me back to Mommy. She will hurt me." But they didn't listen to 8-year-old child. The most damning evidence came from Jennifer Thompson, who lived next door to Amanda Williams and had been secretly documenting the abuse for months. "I'm a retired police officer," Mrs. Thompson testified via video conference. "When I moved next door to Amanda Williams last year, I initially thought she was a lovely single mother trying to raise her daughter alone. But within weeks I began noticing disturbing patterns, screaming from their house that went on for hours. The child crying, 'Please stop, Mommy, I'll be good.' The mother's voice screaming profanities and threats." Mrs. Thompson had used her law enforcement background to carefully document everything she witnessed. I set up a security camera in my backyard that captured portions of their yard. What I recorded over 6 months was systematic child torture. She provided the court with over 20 hours of video and audio recordings. Frank Caprio reviewed selected clips, each more disturbing than the last. In one recording, Amanda could be heard screaming, "You worthless little brat, you ruined my life. I should have given you to your father years ago." This was followed by the sound of what appeared to be a child being struck repeatedly. "Why didn't you call police immediately after witnessing these incidents?" asked Frank Caprio. "I did, Your Honor. I called police 17 times over 6 months. Each time they sent Detective Michael Bradley. Each time he would spend 5 minutes talking to Amanda Williams, who would claim I was a jealous neighbor trying to cause trouble. Dr. Sarah Chen, Sofia's pediatrician, provided testimony via video conference that painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse. "I have treated Sofia Mendez since she was born," Dr. Chen began. "Until 1 year ago, she was a healthy, normal child with typical childhood injuries. However, beginning in March of last year, the pattern of injuries changed dramatically. The frequency increased to weekly visits, and the nature of the injuries became inconsistent with accidental causes." Dr. Chen displayed a medical chart. 47 emergency room or urgent care visits in 12 months, Your Honor. The average child Sofia's age might have 3 or 4 such visits annually. More troubling were the types of injuries. Multiple burns in various stages of healing, suggesting repeated exposure to hot objects. Bruising patterns consistent with grip marks and restraint injuries. Dental trauma from what appeared to be facial impacts. I filed 8 separate reports with Child Protective Services over 6 months. Each report was acknowledged, but no meaningful investigation occurred. I was told repeatedly that the child's mother was cooperative and credible. Frank Caprio interrupted the video testimony. "Dr. Chen, in your professional medical opinion, was this child in immediate physical danger?" "Your Honor, I believed Sofia was at risk of serious bodily harm or death. I had never seen such systematic evidence of child abuse in my 15 years of practice." Frank Caprio had reached the most difficult decision of his judicial career. The evidence was overwhelming. Sofia Sofia had been systematically abused. The system had failed her completely due to corruption, and her father had committed a federal crime while trying to save her life. This case has shaken my faith in our justice system, the judge began. I have sat on this bench for 40 years, believing that our institutions ultimately serve justice. This case has challenged that fundamental belief. Carlos Mendez stands before me as a man who committed a federal crime. The law is clear. He illegally removed his child from the jurisdiction with intent to flee the country. Under normal circumstances, this would result in a significant prison sentence. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Carlos closed his eyes, preparing for the worst. However, Frank Caprio continued, his voice growing stronger, these are not normal circumstances. This is a case where the law and justice have become completely separated, where following the letter of the law would compound an already tragic injustice. The judge stood up, his voice now filled with righteous anger. I have reviewed every piece of evidence in this case. I have seen photographs that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I have heard testimony that has challenged everything I thought I knew about our child protection system. And I have reached an inescapable conclusion. Carlos Mendez did not commit a crime against his daughter. He committed an act of salvation. He saved her life when every system designed to protect her had failed. Therefore, I am making the following rulings in this case. First, all charges against Carlos Mendez are hereby dismissed with prejudice. This man was not a kidnapper. He was a father protecting his child when every system designed to do so had catastrophically failed. Second, I am ordering an immediate and comprehensive investigation into every agency and individual involved in Sofia's case. The corruption and negligence displayed here represents a systemic failure that cannot go unpunished. Third, Amanda Williams is hereby charged with multiple counts of aggravated child abuse, child endangerment, and filing false police reports. A warrant for her arrest will be issued immediately. Fourth, Sofia Mendez will remain in her father's custody permanently, pending only routine social services check-ins to ensure her continued well-being. The courtroom erupted in applause and sobs. Carlos collapsed to his knees, sobbing with relief. Amanda Williams, who had been present throughout the hearing, was immediately taken into custody by court officers. Finally, Frank Caprio concluded, I am referring this entire case to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office for a comprehensive review of our child protection system. This cannot happen to another child ever again. The case made national headlines within hours. Cable news programs featured extensive coverage of the systematic failures that had nearly cost Sofia her life. Within weeks, massive changes began occurring throughout the Massachusetts child welfare system. Linda Carter was fired immediately and faced criminal charges for corruption. Detective Michael Bradley was suspended without pay. Amanda Williams was convicted on multiple counts of aggravated child abuse and sentenced to 15 years in prison without possibility of parole. Carlos and Sofia began the long process of healing from their trauma. Sofia required extensive therapy to address her PTSD, but slowly began to recover the bright, curious personality her father remembered. She started laughing again, playing with other children, sleeping through the night without nightmares. Carlos was able to legalize his immigration status with help from pro bono attorneys inspired by his case. The publicity surrounding the trial had led to widespread community support, and he was able to start his own small construction company, providing Sofia with a stable, loving home. Years later, Frank Caprio would reflect on this case as the most important of his career. It taught me that sometimes the greatest act of lawbreaking is the most moral thing a person can do, he wrote in his memoir. The case led to sweeping reforms in Massachusetts child protection laws. The Sofia Protocol was established, requiring independent medical examination of all children in disputed custody cases and mandatory background checks for social workers to identify conflicts of interest. Most importantly, the case established legal precedent that parents facing systematic failure of child protection services could claim necessity defense when taking extraordinary measures to protect their children from imminent harm. Sofia, now a teenager, excelled in school and showed remarkable resilience. She occasionally spoke at conferences about child abuse prevention. My papa saved my life, she would tell audiences. He risked everything because he loved me enough to do what was right, even when it wasn't legal. He showed me that sometimes you have to be brave enough to break bad rules to protect what matters most. Frank Caprio's handling of this case demonstrated that true justice sometimes requires the courage to challenge an unjust system. His willingness to look beyond the surface charges and investigate the deeper truth saved not only Sofia's life, but also prevented similar tragedies for countless other children. Carlos Mendez, the undocumented immigrant who spoke broken English and worked with his hands, had achieved something that lawyers, judges, social workers, and police officers had failed to do. He had protected his child from systematic abuse and exposed the corruption that enabled it. In the end, love had triumphed over law, justice had overcome procedure, and a father's courage had exposed the darkness that nearly destroyed his daughter's life. Frank Caprio closed his memoir entry on this case with words that would be quoted for years. Justice is not found in the letter of the law, but in the courage to do what is right when the law fails the innocent. Sometimes it takes a father's love to remind us what justice really means.